here. I'm gonna speak. Dave's gonna speak, and then I'm gonna speak and end with
Let's
"Let's
dive
dive
in.
in," and then the music intro can come in. All right. Think about the last time you had a free hour, an actual open block of time, the thing you'd been waiting for all day. You sat down to finally do the important thing, and you just couldn't. You reorganized your desk, you refilled your water, you were busy the whole hour, and that one thing that mattered was exactly where you left it. So, what was that? It wasn't a time problem. You had the hour. So, what actually ran out?
Here's the shift almost nobody makes. We've all been trained to manage our lives like a calendar. We block the time, we fit more in, we optimize the schedule, but time is fixed. Everybody has the same 24 hours, and you cannot make more no matter how good your system is. The performance researchers Jim Lur and Tony Schwartz spent years working with elite performers, and they came to a simple conclusion. The people who sustain high performance aren't managing their time better, they're managing their energy better. Energy is the thing that actually decides whether an hour is worth anything. And unlike time, energy goes up and down. It can be spent and it can be rebuilt, which means it's the one you can actually do something about. Time management tells you where the hour goes, energy management determines what you can bring to that hour. Ariana Huffington discovered energy management when her body forced the issue. In 2007, after running on too little sleep for too long, she collapsed, hit her desk, and broke her cheekbone. Her calendar had not failed her. Her ambition had not failed her. Her body had simply reached the point where it would no longer cooperate.
So, today we're going to break down why your energy runs in waves and not a straight line, why you've actually got four different types of energy you're managing, not just one, why recovery is part of the work instead of the reward for it, and what a simple daily practice looks like to get more out of the same 24 hours. Let's dive in.
So, the first idea is to manage energy, not time. Let's start by challenging the thing we've all been told, which is that the answer is to a full life is just better time management or a better system, a tighter calendar, a smarter app, a better to-do list or system for tracking our tasks. And those help, but they help at the margins. What the researchers Lair and Schwartz found is that working with people at the very top of their fields, they found the real lever somewhere is it's something else. Their point is simple. Everybody gets the same amount of time. What separates the people who sustain it from the people who burn out isn't how they slice it up, it's how they manage their energy across the day. That's actually good news because we can't create more time, but we can become more intentional about the physical, emotional, and mental capacity we bring to time. So think about your phone. You can have a whole day of stuff lined up on it calls, maps, music, the works. But if the battery's sitting at 4%, none of that matters. The schedule's full and the phone's still dead. And most of us obsess over what's on the calendar and we completely ignore the battery.
That's a good analogy, the phone analogy. If the phone's yourself, the device, you have all the plans, like you said. But if you're at 4%, none of the plans matter. That's a great analogy. And in the research, the another idea, and this was new to me. This was really fascinating. You run on waves, not a straight line. So here's the part that changes how you plan a day. Your energy and focus don't hold a steady line from 9 to 5. They run in waves. And this research comes from Nathaniel Kleitman. He's who's commonly referred to as the father of modern sleep science. He's the guy who discovered REM sleep back in the 50s. That roughly 90-minute cycle your brain moves through all night, the rapid eye movement. And here's the part that matters for us. He noticed that the same rhythm doesn't stop when you wake up. It keeps running all day long. Roughly every 60 to 90 minutes, you move from sharp and locked in to foggy and restless. Although it can look a bit different for every person, there's some nuance there. But the key point is attention is not designed to remain perfectly steady for hours.
I love that idea. We know we go through these cycles in sleep, and reading this just it could really resonate with me because I feel that throughout my own day.
Yeah, right. So around that 60 to 90-minute mark, you start fidgeting, you get hungry, you reach for your phone and scroll, you lose the thread. Most of us read that as a personal failing, and we push through. We grab more caffeine, more willpower, but pushing through the dip doesn't create more energy. You're just borrowing energy from later.
Interesting.
It's like sprinting versus jogging. Nobody expects to sprint for an hour straight. You sprint, you recover, you sprint again. Your brain follows a similar principle. Sustained effort eventually needs recovery. It's built for short, hard efforts followed by a reset, not one long, even grind.
Yeah, I love that idea. The third idea is kind of really the crux of the research from Lauren Schwartz, and that's that we have four batteries, not one. It's not just physical energy. When we say energy, that's what most people think of. Am I physically tired or not? But what Lauren
Mm.
Schwartz, they developed an energy management model. Their model includes four pillars of energy: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And spiritual is sometimes referred to in other literature as meaning or purpose. But these are not literal batteries, but the model helps explain why sleep alone doesn't really solve every kind of exhaustion. And here's why that's useful: you can sleep 8 hours and still feel completely empty because the drained battery isn't the physical one. The person who's technically rested but dreads their whole day isn't physically tired. They're running on empty emotionally. And if you only ever try to fix tiredness with more sleep, you'll keep missing the tank that's actually low, the part of your life that needs recharging. And Michael Phelps, he's a really good example of why physical energy is not the whole story. He was in extraordinary physical condition. He was sleeping regularly and winning more Olympic medals than anyone in history, and then experienced severe depression when the competition ended. His physical capacity was world class, but achievement had not answered the emotional question or the meaning question. Who am I when the race is over? The answer for Phelps when he felt low energy was not better sleep or nutrition. He had that down to a science. The answer was to recharge his emotional and spiritual batteries. So imagine driving with four warning lights on the dashboard. You can have a full gas in the tank and still be unable to drive safely because the engine is overheating or the brakes need attention. And in the same way, if we're only looking at the gas tank, in that analogy, which is maybe our sleep or our physical rest, 8 hours of sleep doesn't automatically repair emotional conflict or scattered attention or loss of purpose.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good reframe. I think most of us would think physical energy is really the only energy you think about, right?
Yeah, and it's a big one, and obviously we've talked a ton about how important sleep is, and overall, as our in our society, we are sleep deprived, and that's probably a good place to start. But it's important to realize that that's only one of the four areas that in the research, the different types of energy.
Yeah, don't ignore the other warning lights on the dashboard,
Yeah.
right? So let's kind of break down this research and what we're talking about, what we're not talking about here. What we are talking about is energy management, matching what you spend to what you have, and then rebuilding it on purpose in those individual areas instead of running the tank dry. So we're not talking about a time hack, a productivity system, or working more hours. And The key here on the Mental Fitness podcast, as it relates to mental fitness, is it's fully trainable. You can learn your rhythm, protect your peaks, and build recovery into each day like any other fitness skill.
Yeah, I love that. So let's name it plainly. This really isn't just about doing more in less time. It's about, and it's not even the opposite when you read books like Essentialism and stuff that's just saying it's not about doing more, it's about doing less better. We're not talking even
Mm-hmm.
about that. It
Right.
What we're talking about is spending the energy you have where it counts and refilling it instead of grinding it when we're out. But being able to recognize the different types of energy and refilling the part that's low. It
Yeah, that's interesting. It also, I don't know why I thought of this, but you can spend energy throughout the day, and it's proven that people have less willpower at night, right? Like, let's say someone's trying to healthily lose some weight, and nighttime cravings, or when you have those nighttime munchies or cravings, it's really hard. But what I'd imagine here, as I'm thinking about this, Dave, is if you're recharging those other batteries as well. I know we're saying it's not a willpower problem, but I think you'll have more willpower, for lack of better words, to make those decisions if you're focused on these other areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And it is interesting that our willpower is better in the morning than it is in the evening. And so but maybe that's just because we're not refilling and recharging our batteries, and the only way we
Right.
really recharge is when we sleep. And when we sleep, we are recharging parts of all of our other batteries. It's more than just physical. We do emotionally recharge a bit when we're sleeping. I think the main point is that there's just some things that sleep doesn't fix.
Right. Maybe there's some energy areas of energy, these other three that we're not as focused on, that you can now focus on.
Yeah.
So now that we've talked about a body that runs on waves, the four different batteries, and a clock we can't stretch. That's a variable we can't touch. That's the picture. So the obvious next question is what this actually looks like in a normal week or day, because almost nobody is building their day around energy today. Most of us are building it around our calendar and then wondering why the calendar keeps winning and we keep losing. So let's talk about where this shows up in real life and where people are quietly draining themselves without noticing.
Yeah, that's a yeah, let's turn the theory into practice. So why don't you, Luke, you've spent a lot of time thinking about this in terms of the afternoon crash. Like, talk about that.
Yeah, so that mid-afternoon wall that, as humans a lot of us face, it's one of the most predictable things in your day, and it's usually two things stacked. One is your natural rhythm dipping, and we all feel that. Plus, one factor is whatever you fed the machine yourself at lunch. A breakfast that's all sugar and a lunch that spikes you means that crash is inevitable. It's basically already on the schedule for later in the day. And this is just one factor, but the fix is boring and it works. Steadier fuel, steadier energy, protein in the morning, staying hydrated, drinking water before you're actually thirsty, and something at lunch that doesn't spike you and then drop you an hour later. That's just one idea there. Notice what you eat before your two most important work blocks, and treat it like fuel. It is literally fuel. Treat it like pre-workout fuel, because it is. That the workout's your day.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that eating is the way we eat and drink is probably the number one contributing factor to that afternoon crash. And I think you just cited like the high sugar breakfast and the high carb lunch. We're just the way blood sugar works and everything, we're just destined for that afternoon crash. You can optimize and improve your eating and that'll significantly improve it. I noticed that for me myself. And yet still there's sometimes when I still hit a wall in the afternoon, and I don't think it's always related to what I eat, probably most of the time, but sometimes it's just
Right.
part of your circadian rhythm, and you're just tired. And what I've found for that afternoon, sometimes instead of just pushing through or reaching for a Diet Coke or whatever source of caffeine you prefer to get me through the afternoon, we'll talk a little bit more caffeine later in the episode, but instead of doing something like that, I found sometimes a 20-minute power nap in the early afternoon. That'll make the rest of my day twice as effective.
That's a
Even
good
though I'm
point.
taking 20 minutes away. But I think food is probably where we start mostly. So I like that. That the other one is just grinding too much. Sometimes it's important to sometimes, we just have to push through in life sometimes. But when you push straight through like that 90-minute dip that we talked about every 60 90 minutes, or when you just try to push through when you're physically tired, it's you're not being disciplined. You're really draining the tank for a task that your brain's already checked out of. And
Mm.
and sometimes that's just not the best use of time. So real recovery beats fake recovery. And here's the thing is sometimes people get they're caught up in their work, or they just feel like they can't focus, and so they decide they need to take a break, and that's a good thing, right? And good examples of breaks might be a brief walk around the block, get some sunshine, get some physical movement in, or it might be a 20-minute power nap, it might be some other things like that. I think a common mistake is doom scrolling, saying like, oh, I just need to take a break from work, and so then you either sit in a chair or lay on the couch or whatever, and as you doom scroll, you think that that's rest,
Mm.
but it isn't always recovery. It's just a different screen, and it depends what you're doing. But gaming or social media scrolling, they can often make your brain more tired. They don't provide actual rest. We
Yeah.
had a whole episode on this when we talked with our neuroscientist. So like really getting outside for a short walk, like I mentioned, getting quiet for 5 minutes just to like gather your thoughts, or other things. That's a way better way than just pushing through, reaching for caffeine, or doom scrolling. So I think a good practical application is after like a focus block of getting a lot done, is take a real break from the screen. Like get up, move to the other room, talk to a coworker. If you're working from home, see if there's anyone you live with, talk to
Hmm.
someone, get some fresh air, but actually take an actual break. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be 5 minutes. We're not talking about just breaking up your workday so you don't get a lot accomplished, but instead of just finishing the task and then when your brain is screaming for a break, just going, no, I just gotta push through. You're actually going to do better in that next block of work if you just take some time to recharge.
I want to touch on a point you said that's really important, and I think people need to internalize, and I've had to internalize myself. It's when you're, let's say you do this sprint of work, you're not just active recovery isn't context switching. You're not just taking your mind off of work and taking it to your phone and doom scrolling, like you said. So it's not taking your mind off the thing. It's actively recharging,
It's
right? In,
resting
in
the
all
mind.
those, it's resting the mind. It's not switching it to and driving on a different road. It's stop driving,
Yeah,
recharge.
and when we had that episode where we talked about this specifically, what was eye opening for me was understanding the neuroscience of your brain needs rest. And while we think just getting on our phone and playing that game, or scrolling or watching some on YouTube or scrolling whatever social media, we might think that that feels relaxing and it's a break because, like you said, it's a context switch. Those things are designed to stimulate our brains, and they're
Yeah.
giving us dopamine hits, and they actually require rest after those activities. So we
Yep.
what we think might be helping us, like, oh, I've been so focused on this work, I need to take a break. Then we go do it'd be like you'd be like saying you're running and you're just like, I can't keep running, I need to take a rest. So like I'm just going to go to the weight room and like work my legs to rest so I can go back and run again.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a different way of using those leg muscles, but you're not resting your legs by lifting weights. So it's kind of, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is an important point to understand. what real rest is.
Yeah, exactly. So another area of life, this can be you know a lens you can think through is relationships and emotional energy. So the emotional battery is one that people ignore the longest. Not myself, and I say that because I believe I lean more introvert, and any introverts listening, you know the emotional battery is one you're probably most aware of. But the more so the hard conversation you keep avoiding, the low grade conflict that you're carrying, the yes you said when you really wanted to say no, all of it quietly drains you, even if you feel physically fine. So protecting emotional energy sometimes looks like a boundary. It's not a nap necessarily for emotional energy all the time, but closing an open loop can give you more back than an extra hour of sleep when we're talking about emotional energy specifically.
That's big. And setting boundaries is probably the number one way to protect your emotional energy. And then I think another thing is when we sort of match the task to the tank. Like, is this task that I'm doing, is it drawing on my physical energy? Is it drawing on my
Mm.
emotional energy, and making sure that we're up for it. So, for example, some people are sharpest first thing in the morning. Some others don't come alive till the afternoon, and that's really based on our circadian rhythm. There's night owls and early birds, and that's biology. It's not that one's better or worse, but the mistake is scheduling your hardest, most important work in your worst window. If you're an early bird, scheduled in the morning. If you're a night owl, then maybe the early afternoon is the best time for you. So Jeff Bezos is really good at this. He's been said to prioritize 8 hours of sleep. That's just something it's a non-negotiable for him. But the other interesting thing that I just learned this week is that he schedules mentally demanding meetings, like high IQ meetings, always before lunch. By
Mm.
the late afternoon, he prefers to postpone a difficult decision to the next day rather than making it with diminished mental sharpness. So while the 5 p.m. hour has the same 60 minutes as the 9 a.m. hour, not every hour carries the same cognitive capacity. And so and he also went on to say that executives' primary role is not to make lots of decisions, it's to make few but very important decisions.
Yeah.
And so he just and I can just imagine that if it's a late afternoon and he's tired, he's not going to take a meeting to discuss or make an important decision. He's like, let's
Yeah.
put this off till tomorrow when we're all fresh and ready. So sometimes it's just being thoughtful about the time of day when certain type of work is best done. And that can be whether it's physical, cognitive work, emotional work, spiritual, whatever it is. So put your most demanding work in your peak window and save the low energy hours for the like low stake stuff. Emptying your email inbox or errands or other kinds of busy work. You can do that when you might be, a little bit more tired physically or emotionally.
I love that. Yeah, that's very important, and it's very individual, right? Which leads right into this episode's practical framework or tool that you can take and apply this yourself. So the framework we're going to walk through today is called Map, Sprint, Refuel. So here's what it is. We'll lay out the steps. Step one: map your peaks. What we mean by that is find when you naturally have the most energy, instead of assuming, just like Dave said, instead of assuming every hour is equal. So for a few days, just notice when you feel sharp, and also notice when you start to fade. Pick your one best window and guard it for your most important work. That's what mapping your peaks is. That's the first step.
Second one is like sprint, don't grind. And there's a difference here. So it's working with the wave of energy you feel instead of against it. So work in focused blocks of 90 minutes, for example, and then take a real break with physical movement or stepping outside, getting off your screen, like something to physically reset instead of just pushing through. And depending on the nature of your work, whatever it is you're doing, you can chunk that based on like whatever the chunk of time that seems to work for you. 60 to 90 minutes is the general time. And some can go a little longer, but find the chunk of time that works for you, and then intentionally plan work around that. But when you've kind of hit that, maybe you set a timer. You actually take a physical break. So it's important to sprint, but grinding is when you've then depleted that energy, and then just using sheer willpower, you just force yourself to keep going. But what you're actually doing there, and I actually like the word grind because I think of like grinding your brakes in a car when the brake pads get down to the bottom when they need to be
Mm,
replaced and they start grinding, and it's like that's actually a sign that you need to change them. But if you don't, you actually do more damage than if you did. It's inconvenient to go get your brakes changed, and you're like, oh, I don't have time this week, so I'm just gonna keep driving for another week or two until I get them fixed.
mm,
And while that might feel like a good time optimization, you just you're doing real damage, and then the cost of potentially replacing all your rotors and everything just goes way up. And I think that's what I think of here is when you feel like you're grinding, that's like those brake pads at the bottom. It's like, okay, I need to do something different.
yeah, that's a good analogy. Sprint, don't grind. So first step, map your peaks. Number two of the framework, sprint, don't grind. And the last step here is refuel. Refuel on purpose. So give the tank something back deliberately with intention. Pick one energy stabilizing habit and actually do it. That can be, like we said, your nutrition, food and hydration. It can be a little walk, a workout, whatever works for you to refuel on purpose. So that's the whole framework. Map your peaks, sprint, don't grind, and refuel on purpose. Map, sprint, refuel.
I don't know if you're planning on talking about this later, Luke, but I having worked with you for several years now, I feel like you do this really well in terms of the way you organize your work schedule and know when you're effective and then when to take a break. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of like I hate to put you on the spot. I don't know if you plan on talking about this, but just when you were talking, I just thought like you're a good example of this. Do you want to just walk through like your typical workday, the way you've kind of designed it around you?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, and I did think about this a lot early in my career, and it took me looking back to realize the contrast here. But early in my career, I landed at a company that was growing super fast, and you did what you do in your early 20s, early in your career, 7 in the morning to 6 at night. You're grinding, right? Because you've got to prove it. And I want to be careful here because I do think there's a season for that. There's a version of that stretch that's real and worth it, but only if you don't have other humans depending on you at home and there's other variables, right? But here's what I didn't see at the time. My career grew, my calendar was completely full. I was productive. I was having success by every measure I was tracking, and my tanks were empty. Not the physical one. I was young. I could probably go all day. The ones that were empty were the ones that mattered most. My family, my wife, my kid at the time. I was winning at the thing I was measuring and losing at the thing I actually cared about. So the strange part with all of this is that I already half knew the lesson. I've always been on the train that time doesn't equal output. Results equal output. Hours in the seed and results have never really correlated for me, and I knew that early. I would often even actually playfully push back on my managers or leaders at the time about this. But what I hadn't figured out yet was that what actually does drive results. It's not the hours, it's what you bring to them. So
Right.
today, and you touched on this, Dave, I run my day completely differently now. I get up and work early. I still start my day really early when I'm sharpest, but then I go to the my active recovery, my refuel is the gym. So then I go to the gym in the middle of my workday on purpose, right when most people are pushing through the wall and reaching for more coffee, and I come back afterwards and sprint through some deep work again. So for me, it's sprint, recharge, sprint, which now that we've, spent an episode on this, that's basically the whole framework. I just had to spend a decade learning it the hard way.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that from your earlier career. That last part is what I was kind of talking about, because I love that you do that. I love that we can be flexible. Not everyone's work schedule, unfortunately, is so flexible that you can sort of design your workday the way you want. You have fixed hours and you check in and stuff. So it doesn't work for everyone, but I love that you start your day really early and you get a lot done. And then there's this period in the day when you're gone. But I love it. But you get a lot done and you deliver a lot, and you've learned how to optimize the energy you bring to the hours. And so when I was just going through this and I just thought of that example, I didn't mean to put you on the spot right at that time. I just was thinking, yeah, Luke does a really good job of this. And I've kind of tried to borrow from that. And so like lately I sort of try to work in some of my exercise as breaks during the day. The sort of traditional thing is you get up early to exercise before work, or you exercise in the evening after work. People hit the gym on the way home, or they do they go running or whatever they early in the morning. But sort of following your lead, I've realized I actually do way better when it's during the day, because I
Yeah.
can get up in the morning and just you're fresh and you get stuff going. I don't know. I just think it's a good pattern. And like I said, it doesn't work for everyone, doesn't work for every work situation, but when
Right.
possible, it's a really good way to apply that framework. So the framework again, map your peaks, understanding when you are personally like what hours of the day are best for you. Sprint in 60 to 90-minute waves, taking real rest in between. Sprint, don't grind. And then the third one is refuel on purpose. Whatever those things are that refuel you physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And the goal isn't a perfect day. It's protecting one peak. It's taking one real break. It's making one honest effort to refuel. So if we do that consistently, then the same 24 hours start to give us a lot more back. I think a key principle is one thing that we can all do today is, if you just take nothing else from this episode, do this. Find your next peak window tomorrow or next work day and put your single most important task there. The window when you're most productive and effective, put the most important thing there. Don't spend your best energy on email. If you're best in the morning, then don't spend your first hour on email. Just put the inbox off for an hour. Spend it on the one thing that actually matters the most, and let the low energy hours carry the low stake stuff.
Love that. So how about we walk through, you know, common pitfalls or mistakes that people will naturally run into as they try out this framework, as they map this out.
Yeah, I'll start. I think a big one is when we treat recovery like slacking. And this is a hard
Mm,
one because Western culture, it's been so
yes.
ingrained in our minds that if you take a nap or you're taking a break from work, like for you to go to the gym in the middle of the workday, I mean,
Yeah.
the people that see you at the gym, if any of them know, like,
Yep.
like, well, what does he do for work? He's here every day in the middle of the day, or late morning. What does he do? But they don't know how early you start and how late you work. But
Right.
but treating recovery as slacking is a big pitfall, and it's like what the trap that people fall into is that rest feels or can seem to be unproductive, and so we skip it and we just push through. But I think what's important to understand is that recovery is part of the work. It's not the reward for the work. It is part of the work. You grow in the rest between sets, not during them. Your muscles are built when you're resting from working out. And one of the things I learned from a lot of the sleep researchers we've talked to is that learning and memory growth happens while you're sleeping. So you can learn a bunch of stuff during the day, and then it becomes permanent while you're sleeping. And that's just evidence that like the rest part of the work.
Right. Yeah, that's a really key point. And you're right that this grind culture as a society, what Western society specifically, is kind of forced upon us. You have to step back a little bit. The one I'll jump to is fixing. I think another people think an antidote is fixing every dip with caffeine or some chemical substance that's going to keep you grinding, right? And the thing is, it's a pretty fast lever, right? So it's easy to jump to. Caffeine can move the wave, but it can't erase it. Again, you're borrowing energy. If you're always pushing through, you're borrowing energy from tomorrow. So, and this is where, so for in my workday, I do consume caffeine in the mornings, but I think because of my recharge midday, it helps with that because I don't have caffeine any other time during the day, and I have plenty of energy. So there's other ways to recharge, and don't immediately reach for the caffeine.
Yeah, and I've found that I've just been as I've been focusing on my sleep and improving my sleep, I've come to recognize that I'm more sensitive to caffeine than I ever wanted to admit before. And I actually think most people
Mm,
are.
yeah.
I hear people who drink tons of Diet Coke or coffee or whatever, and they think, oh yeah, it doesn't affect me. I don't have a problem falling asleep. Then in a separate conversation, you're talking to someone and they're like, yeah, I don't sleep very well. Like I'm always up in the middle of the night and everything. And I'm like, oh, well, there's a relation there, right? Just because caffeine doesn't just stop you from falling asleep. It can disrupt all of your sleep. And then I think that's where it gets into borrowing from tomorrow is when you're
Yeah.
pushing it off. But yeah, when you feel that dip, maybe going for a walk outside and getting some fresh air and some sunlight, and that sunlight can actually bring real energy into your life. That might do just the trick as much as caffeine does, but without some of the harmful side effects.
But I think what should really give people hope around this idea, it's easy to treat tiredness as a willpower issue and get down on yourself. It's like, man, I just need to learn to grind harder. I don't have enough willpower. Everyone else around me does. It's very easy to just be down on yourself and try harder. But you can't out discipline the drained battery. So the hope is the move isn't that you need more willpower, that you're not enough. It's like you said, sleep, nutrition, walking, very simple moves. It's spending and refilling those batteries in a
Yeah.
smarter way, which anyone can do.
Yeah. I think another pitfall, and we talked about this, but just to make it clear, is spending our best energy or our peak energy on low value tasks. And just the Jeff Bezos example really hits home for me because I think here's a guy running one of the biggest companies in the world and he's a very accomplished and successful guy. And he's saying the real important meetings I have before noon when I know that my mind is fresh and crisp, and I won't even do that kind of work in the afternoon. And that's just such a good example. I I'm just guessing that for most people, the early morning hours when you're freshly rested and your mind's clear and clean, I just feel like for most people, probably morning hours are your most effective hours. But probably what most people do in that time is email and calendaring, which is
Right.
something that you can do. You don't need to be doing when you're most crisp. And they're like, okay, I'm going to get all the email, I'm going to get all this stuff done. And then in the afternoon, I'm going to sit down and really work through that document I need to do or that project. And what they're unintentionally doing is the exact worst thing from managing energy. When your energy is best and your mind is most clear, you're doing low like value tasks. Then right when that afternoon dip is about to hit is the time when you've allotted for that strategic project or that important document you need to write or whatever it is. And so I think that that's just a common pitfall. And what we need to guard is just, and not everyone is in the morning. Some people it is the afternoon is their peak time. But once
Hmm.
you've done that exercise of map is step one, map, grind, refuel, or map, sprint, not grind, refuel. No. But once you've done the mapping, then match that mapping, and make
Hmm.
sure that you guard those 2 or 3 hours. They're sacred. Make that your most important work. And if the way you get work done is meetings, then that's when you schedule the meetings. If the way you get work done is quiet time, then you block that off and you're like, I'm not available during this time for meetings. That's when I'm going to be doing my real work.
Yeah, that's an important one. And I think the last one here we've touched on this, but it's worth re-mentioning is fake recovery. And this is hard I've noticed this in myself. You have to be really intentional because reaching for your phone is such a natural instinct today to recover. It's not the right move, but it's very natural. It's a habit you have to be very intentional on breaking when you're seeking active recovery. Right? Scrolling isn't recovery. It's a completely different drain. It is a drain. So move, get outside, get quiet, reflect. Make a real reset. Try to avoid real fake recovery.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just say, like, just from a personal standpoint, I I think that um, some of the stuff that we've talked about here has just in lots of different small ways has like made a difference for me. I think recently, as in the last year, that fake recovery has been a big one. It was really when
Mm.
we had with Dr. Lathan, the
Mm-hmm.
neuroscientist, when he's the one that introduced the idea of the fake recovery. Because I thought sometimes when I needed a break from work, I would get on my phone and scroll, thinking I was taking a break. And it
Right.
was sort of that realization that that's not a break, that that's draining your brain. Just context switch, yes, but you're draining your brain, and then you go back to work thinking that you're going to go back with more energy, and you're returning to work with less energy. That was just like a big one, probably of all of these for me. And then the one that I think that need to work on the most is spending my peak energy during the peak hours.
Mm.
I think that I too often spend my best hours, the best years of my life, the best hours of my day are spent on the least important tasks.
Yeah, great points. Good reflection there. So let's recap and kind of close this out a bit. So first thing, one, time is fixed. Energy is not. Everybody in the whole world gets the same 24 hours. But energy is the variable that you can actually build and rebuild, refill. So that's where the real leverage is here.
I think another key point is you run on waves, not in a straight line. So focus comes in roughly 90-minute cycles. So sprint, then reset instead of just grinding through at the end of those cycles.
The one that I hadn't learned about that I really like too is the you have four batteries. You have four areas of energy, not just one. The physical, emotional, mental, and the spiritual, or the sense of why it matters, or the meaning and purpose. Burnout is not always the result of a battery you forgot to charge. Sometimes the load itself is unsustainable. That's a different thing. But energy management can help you recognize the problem. If your energy levels are correct, you can recognize you have too much load in the first place.
Yeah.
It can't make an impossible workload healthy, but often burnout is due to one of the batteries you've stopped watching.
That's such a good point. I think of fourth point is that recovery is part of the work. And despite what we might have been taught in Western culture, real, recovery is not something to be ashamed of. If we need to take a power nap or take a break, real recovery refills you. Fake recovery just drains you more.
And then the last one is the tool, the practical framework: map, sprint, refuel. Protect one peak, take one real break and recharge, and make one honest refuel.
So I think a core message from today, if nothing else, is you probably don't have a time management problem. You have an energy problem. And that's actually good news because we can do something about that. We can't change the amount of hours in a day or the minutes in an hour, but we can absolutely build more energy. We need to stop managing the clock and start managing the battery.
So, one challenge this week: find your peak window tomorrow and put your single most important tasks inside it. Guard that hour like it matters, because it really does.
We spent a lot of time on this show on things you can train. Energy is one of the most trainable of all, and most people have just never been shown how.
And if you're using New, the mental fitness app, a good check in prompt is, where did my energy actually go today? The app is built exactly for that kind of noticing, spotting the pattern, so you can spend the next day smarter.